We wrap up our players to watch in training camp series today, talking about linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties. Let's go.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to the Locked On Bucs Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And we thank you for making us your first listen or view of the day. I am James Yarcho, finally reunited with my co-host David Harrison after all week long of basically having to not record with one another. But of course, you can check out David's written work over at Sports Illustrated's BucsGameDay.com. Check out mine over at SB Nation's BucsNation.com. And of course, follow along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, and at DHarrison82.
Yeah, thanks again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen or your first view of the day. Today, James, we are going to finish our positional players to watch series up for the upcoming training camp, brother, that starts next Wednesday. As you're watching this before our initial 53-man roster predictions, where, as usual, I will be more correct than you will be. We will, however, put them in our 2022 Locked On Bucs receipts file, so that later on in the year, we can come back and revisit who was more wronger than the other person. But first, we're going to start with the linebackers on today's episode, and we're going to go to the outside linebacker position, popularly known in today's NFL's lingo language as edge rushers. I'm going with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, JTS, the replacement for JPP. Obviously, Jason Pierre-Paul no longer a member of the Buccaneers roster. Interesting Instagram post earlier on Wednesday, if I can keep track of my days. JPP posting on Instagram a picture of him flying, saying, "On my way to my next destination," which could just be like a factual, literally he's on his way to his next destination because he's on a trip, or it could be he's about to sign with a team. I go with the latter just because JPP, I feel like he's got a little too much style to just be completely literal. Like,
Right?
He's not going to post a picture of him in a car going, "I'm sitting in a car." Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not really his style.
I can't wait to see what AFC West team he signs with.
Absolutely. Probably the Raiders, and then Ndamukong Suh will follow, and Bucs fans will become pseudo fans of the Raiders until the playoffs and Super Bowl and all that stuff. But anyway, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, an actual Buccaneer for the 2022 NFL season. I mean, what can you say about this guy as far as expectations, other than all the expectations are on the table? Now, I don't think he's going to be like the next great edge rusher outside linebacker in the NFL this year. I wouldn't put it past him to become that guy at some point in time. I think he's got the ceiling potentially, right, to be that kind of guy. I mean, TJ Watt can do it. Why can't JTS? But I think this year you're just looking for functionality, and you're looking for someone who is going to be a serviceable part of this defense. You don't need him to come out here and get 13, 14 sacks. You would love it, but you don't need it. And I don't think the Buccaneers are necessarily going to plan for it. And you go back again to the scouting combine where Jason Light mentioned, and even Bruce Arians, when he was still the head coach, mentioned wanting to get a better pass rush push from their down linemen. The Vita Veas of the world, William Golston, and now Logan Hall / Akeem Hicks and Nacho and all those guys, Patrick O'Connor, getting in the mix there. But I still think you want Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. You at least have to be respectable, right? You're going to come in here, you're going to be a starter. You know, nobody's going to expect you to be the next Shaq Barrett, blow up the scene your first year in the starting rotation for the Buccaneers. But you can't be a schlub. You got to be at least a threat that they have to account for. And if you can be something even better than that, then that's even better. But I think the expectations have to sit at be impactful. Don't necessarily have to be a superstar. That all starts in training camp, because if we see him early in training camp getting tired, getting playing off a little bit as the heat builds, I mean, that Florida heat, and you need Joe Tryon-Shoyinka to be able to bring the pressure in the fourth quarter just as much as you do in the first.
Yeah, I mean, this is why he was drafted, right? He was drafted to be the heir apparent, replace JPP once JPP moved on. Now, whether that decision was JPP's or the Bucs, that's neither here nor there. I think it was more of the Bucs decision, but this is why you brought this guy in. So now he is transitioning from a rotational role into a starting role. We saw him kind of get a taste of that starting role due to some injuries last year. And, now instead of the rotation being Shaq Barrett, Jason Pierre-Paul, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, we're moving over to Shaq Barrett, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and Anthony Nelson, which Evan Klosky talked about on Wednesday's episode. So you're looking for a little bit of a jump, right? And I'm with you. You're not expecting 12, 13, 14 sacks. Again, that would be great if they got it. But I think you're looking at Tryon-Shoyinka being a 7, 8 sack guy. And if you can get that, I think it's perfect for what they need out of Tryon-Shoyinka. You know, the premier guy, of course, is probably going to continue to be Shaq Barrett. We know they bring blitzes from all around the defense. So if you're in that 6, 7, 8 sack range for Tryon-Shoyinka, I think it's a huge, huge success in his first year as a full-time starter. I'm going to switch it over to the inside linebacker position, and I'm going to talk about Devin White. And I realize people are already shaking their heads. Why? Why are you talking about Devin White? He's a captain. He's a locked and loaded starter. What is there to watch? Well, what there is to watch is a guy who's taken in the top 5 of the draft, who's coming up on needing a contract extension. And we have yet to really see, outside of a playoff run in 2020 that finished with a Lombardi trophy, we have yet to see him put all of the facets of his game together consistently. We've seen him be able to stop the run. We've seen him be able to get after the quarterback. We've seen him be able to drop back and cover in passing situations. He still gets beat by those wheel routes. He still misses tackles. It seems like when 2 parts of his game are at the absolute peak, one part of his game is suffering a little bit and he's being exposed by it. This is the time that Devin White has to put all of this together and really be the catalyst in the middle of this defense. So I expect big things. I predicted this guy to be Defensive Player of the Year last year. And in order for him to reach that plateau, he has to have the kind of season where all of this comes together and he really becomes just an absolute monster with no weaknesses in his game.
Yeah, and listen, before anybody goes, well, that's media pressure and expectations. I asked Devin White about James Yarcho saying that he was going to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and Devin White was all about it. So Devin White also wants to be that guy. And Devin White's never going to shy away from pressure, whether it be pressure from his teammates, himself, the fan base, or the media. Remember, this is a guy that during the NFL scouting combine, and I don't want to ruffle too many feathers because contract time is getting closer and closer for Devin White, but he mentioned he wants to be the first $100 million linebacker. All right, so let's just remember this, okay? Now, whether that's going to happen or not, that's to be seen. But yeah, I mean, Devin White needs to take a step forward, right? Again, Levante David is getting long in the tooth. Who knows where he's going to be? He did happen to like the picture of the new Carolina Panthers alternate uniform. I'm just saying. But Devin White needs to take another step forward this year. Don't kill me, Bucs fans. I'm just kidding. Levante David would never be a Carolina Panther.
Maybe, and I already brought that up on Wednesday's episode that you already flat out said that he was going to be a Carolina Panther. But maybe if he becomes a Carolina Panther, people will be like, oh, this guy really was better than Luke Kuechly, who we put up on a pedestal for like 8 years, even though Levante David was better the entire time.
So could that be worth it? I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I don't think so. Yeah. So the final linebacker that we're going to look at here for ahead of training camp is KJ Britt. And look, like it's basically it's next man up mentality, right? Kevin Minter no longer a part of this team. So what is KJ Britt expected to do this year? He's expected to be Kevin Minter. Well, Kevin Minter played over 300 snaps on defense last year, James. Do you know how many snaps KJ Britt played on defense last year?
52.
28. So Kevin Minter outsnapped KJ Britt by like 300 defensive snaps. Now, KJ Britt played 324 special team snaps, and the special teams captain only played 199 because he had a role on the defense. So that's fine. So what the Buccaneers need is they need KJ Britt to be Kevin Minter, more defense, a little bit less special teams, but still special teams. And they need Grant Stewart to be KJ Britt, which is all special teams, very little defense. That's what the Bucs need for not just Britt, but also Grant Stewart. And again, because I like KJ Britt going back to the Senior Bowl the year that he was drafted, I am confident that he can do it. And I'm also confident the Bucs wouldn't have made this move because you can get Kevin Minter for cheap. He's still out there. He's still available for agent. They did not bring back Kevin Minter because of money. They let Kevin Minter walk because they felt KJ Britt was ready for this assignment. So if they're comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it. And I'm confident that the Buccaneers are going to like the results, James. We're going to talk more about some players to watch for training camp next week. And we're also going to talk about some results that people like, just like our friends over at Built Bar, Built.com, because everything they put out is delicious and the results are amazing, including the s'mores puff, James. So puffs have become a fan favorite from the Built.com crowd. We recently got some s'mores puffs preview bars in the mail. We're fortunate enough that we have it like that. We have that plug. We get a little bit of a sample before they go live on the website. The s'mores bars are now actually available on the website. So you can go to Built.com, buy yourself a box of Built s'mores puffs. And I'll tell you right now, there are some other products coming out, James, that we're not actually allowed to talk about, but I had one of these future products today. It's very delicious. So definitely keep your eyes peeled to the website. They just had orange creamsicle, which, obviously as someone who covers the Bucs, I'm kind of like, ooh, I want to buy those just because I like the way they look, but they also taste delicious. Built bars are always protein filled. They're always good for you, but they don't taste like they're good for you. Sometimes even better than your favorite candy bar. So go check out your favorite Built bar or get yourself a sample mix box by going to Built.com. Use a promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off of whatever order you decide to place. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 at Built.com. Thanks again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast first listen or your first view every single day. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, so already ongoing. Locked On is going to give you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL according to the odds makers at BetOnline. Available again July 18th, so it's already gotten underway. I think we're up to like 20 to 15 range, moving our way up to the number one line mover and shaker in the NFL. Check out Locked On NFL wherever you get your podcast and, of course, on YouTube. James, time to move on to the cornerbacks, which is going to be a very interesting group, a very enticing group to discuss from top to bottom, honestly. There's a lot of guys to look at here, and you're looking for improvement over 2021, but then you also have to look to the future. And when I look to the future, I look at Sam Houston's Zion McCollum, one of the most popular draft picks from this year's draft class for obvious reasons. He's got length, he's got athleticism, he loves to play physical brand of football. And talking to his coach from Sam Houston earlier this offseason on this very show, he's got a high football IQ, very competitive, very hard worker. He told a story about one of the COVID-shortened off seasons that they had where they basically ended a season. And I think it was like 90 days later, they're starting a new season where they would normally be doing training camp. And he actually had to go out there and tell Zion, hey, dude, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to make yourself sick, and we need you healthy. Take a break, relax a little bit, let your body heal because we need you. You're that important. So a guy, I mean, you want him to be smart about his body, right? So you kind of want him to already kind of know, like, hey, back off a little bit. But if you have to have a problem, you don't want to have to motivate a guy. You want to have to almost kind of pull the reins back on a guy and say, hey, look, we love the work ethic, but go inside in the air conditioning and study some film with that work ethic. Don't come out here and run, suicide sprints. I don't know if we're allowed to call them that anymore. I don't know in today's world, but don't go out here running a bunch of sprints in the 130 feels like 170 degree Florida summer.
Yeah, obviously, I'm really excited about Zion McCollum. It's somebody that we talked about quite a bit during the draft process leading up to the draft, and he's going to compete. He's going to compete for a job to be on the field. You take a look at these corners outside of Carlton Davis, who still had his own issues last year with injury and had some struggles here and there, but some of these jobs are wide open. You take a look at a depth chart right now, and you see Jamel Dean's kind of locked in as cornerback 2 right now, but Sean Murphy-Bunting is competing for that job. Zion McCollum is competing for that job, and I'm real excited to see how well he takes to not only Todd Bowles' defense, but how quickly he learns it, because this is a very complicated defense to learn. Asking a rookie corner to basically grasp it immediately is going to be a tall task, but I have faith, given what you discussed with his coach. If anybody can do it, McCollum can do it. He'll be able to grasp this system and grasp what he needs to do relatively quickly. Somebody that I'm going to be keeping a very keen eye on is, of course, Sean Murphy-Bunting. Injured in week 1 last year, out for a really long time, and then was just never himself. And when Sean Murphy-Bunting is on, he's really, really, really good. There's no question about it. But how big of a toll is last year's performance and last year's injury going to take on his psyche and the mental side of his game this year? Is he going to bounce back? Is he out to prove the last year was an anomaly and he deserves to be on this field and he could get the job done. That's something. And again, he's competing with Jamel Dean for that number one, or the number two starting position at corner opposite of Carlton Davis. So you would hope that the cream rises to the top, right? And if Sean Murphy-Bunting earns this job, then he will have legitimately earned that job. He's not just being handed anything. So a wide open competition, somebody who struggled mightily in 2021. I want to see how he bounces back in 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean Murphy-Bunting, I mean, look, he's a guy that if you go back to draft weekend, not a lot of people were kind of onto him. Not a lot of people studied him. I know we really never even talked about Sean Bunting at the time. And then he shortly after the draft became Sean Murphy-Bunting. And since then, like you mentioned, a very, very up and down type of player in this Todd Bowles defense. And you also wonder not just the kind of the ramifications of the injury and the down year and all that stuff, but the contract situation looming, not just his contract, but Jamel Dean's contract and Mike Edwards' contract. Like there are a lot of contracts in the secondary from key players that are coming up and coming due that the Buccaneers can't feasibly, honestly, re-sign all of them unless they all just take extremely team-friendly deals, which, I mean, look, if Tom Brady comes back for 2023, you know what I mean? Maybe they all come back and say, look, we'll play for a little bit less. Let Zion be number 4 for another year and let him develop a little bit more, and we'll all come back and get the band back together. But the bottom line is Sean Murphy-Bunting, I think he starts 2022 behind the 8 ball. And going back to the PFF grades overall, I mean, Jamel Dean overall for his career has a 71.8 PFF grade, which is in the green. Sean Murphy-Bunting's got a 56.4, which is in the amber orangish color, which, so even if you don't necessarily agree with all their grade metrics, I mean, that's almost a 20-point difference. So it's not even really close talking about splitting hairs coverage wise. SMB's got a 56.9 career grade, while Jamel Dean's got a 74.7. And Jamel Dean is that last cornerback that we've got to watch for training camp, because again, I mean, these guys are friends, they're teammates, they've gone to battle together, they're draft mates, they're classmates, all these things. But look, they're fighting for the number 2 spot, like period. Like you kind of just mentioned it, they're fighting for that number 2 spot, and they're fighting for their second NFL contract. Now, neither of these guys are going to go unsigned next year, right? As a free agent and all that stuff, like both of them will get signed kind of regardless what happens, unless one of them suffers, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, but like a late January, early February ACL or something like that. They're going to be on a team. It's just a matter of which one gets the second contract with the team that drafted him and which one has got to go out there into the open market looking for one. And I think Jamel Dean has the upper hand. Plus, he's got the speed, he's got the athleticism. If he stays healthy and continues to build his defensive repertoire, I think there's a very real possibility that Sean Murphy-Bunting ends up being the odd man out in 2023 if Zion can pick up as a rookie as well as we hope he can. And again, that might sound like, well, why are we talking about 2023 offseason? Because that starts in training camp, that starts in the practices, and it starts in the preseason, especially going up against the likes of like the Tyreek Hills of the world and all that stuff in these joint practices, and then going to Tennessee, going up against like a young guy like Treylon Burks. Like this is a young receiver up and coming. If you get worked by Treylon Burks in training camp, it isn't going to seal your deal, but it does kind of speak to a little bit of where you're going, and that all leads into the regular season.
Yeah, and there was a stretch last year. It was like a 3-4 game stretch where Jamel Dean was the number 1 corner in the NFL. He was allowing or creating the worst passer rating in the NFL when targeted. So Jamel Dean, much like Sean Murphy-Bunting, when he's on, he is on, and he is an absolute asset to this team. So like you said, competition breeds excellence, right? You got Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting and a little bit of Zion McCollum all battling for this one spot. And like you pointed out, they're battling for that next contract because you could probably sign one. You may not be able to sign both. So this is their future, their livelihood, their opportunity at another Lombardi, all rolled in to one training camp, one preseason, and then, of course, throughout the season. So really, really important battle there at cornerback. An interesting battle back at safety, which we are going to talk about in just a moment. But first, betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Wrapping things up here on a Friday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and we've reached the end of our positional battles, David, and we are talking safeties. I think we can agree we don't really need to watch Antoine Winfield Jr. He's locked, he's loaded, top 10 safety in the NFL. We're going to watch him.
I mean, we want to watch. Yeah, like we're going to enjoy watching him.
We're going to watch him because he's fun to watch, but we don't really need to study him, right?
Right.
So someone that we do need to study as far as what he's going to be doing, what he's asked to do, where he fits into this defense is one of those free agent signings. And of course, I'm talking about Logan Ryan. We have referred to him numerous times on this show as the Swiss Army knife. He's a guy you can line up at safety. He can draw back into coverage. He can blitz from that position. He can line up at slot corner. He can line up at linebacker. He can be all over the field. So what is it that Logan Ryan is going to be doing for this defense? I don't know if I really put him in a category where he is competing for a starting job, but he is going to have to somehow, some way compete with a lot of different players for playing time. There's a lot that he can bring to this defense, but is he going to be a 30% snap guy? Is he going to be a 20% snap guy? 50% snap guy? We're going to start to get a taste of that during training camp based on some of the packages that we see rolled out, based on where we see him lining up, who he's out there, what personnel he's out there with. But really important to start to get an idea of what his role will be starting next week in training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, much more of a coverage guy, right? Used to be a cornerback. That was his organic position. You'll probably see him play a little bit of that as needed. And I think it's a very strategic move for the Buccaneers to bring him in because not only can he contribute as a safety, but he can also contribute again in a pinch if there's injuries. Instead of having to go out and find a Richard Sherman, you've got Logan Ryan, who has now been on your team, learning your language, learning your schemes, getting to know the guys. And now he can step in with experience, with veteran experience into one of those positions if you need him. And if not, you still can have a role for him as a safety or in kind of one of those flexible roles that defenses like to use now. And speaking of those, Buffalo nickel has kind of become a very popular position to use in the NFL these days. Keanu Neal, another free agent acquisition, former Atlanta Falcon by way of the Dallas Cowboys, would love to go back to Dallas in week 1 and hand his former head coach and now former defensive coordinator a loss there to start the season. Keanu Neal is kind of that Buffalo nickel role type of guy that you really want. He's got a little bit of pass coverage ability. You know what I mean? If you get the right matchup, not going to put him on a Tyreek Hill or a Travis Kelce, but if you get him on a mid-level tight end or a slower kind of bigger wide receiver, he can hold his own, but he can also stack the box. And he can also become kind of a fifth linebacker when you're talking about a 3-4. And what's even better is you have an athlete like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, even Shaquille Barrett, and you have Devin White and Levante David. There's just a lot of things you can do with them. You put him in the box, and all of a sudden the offensive line, they got a point, and they got to say, look, I got this guy, you got this guy. We think here's what's going to happen. Next thing you know, Shaq Barrett takes a false step towards the edge of the offensive line formation, and then he kicks off into kind of a short zone pass defense. Meanwhile, that left tackle or that tackle is kicking out to block him, and Keanu Neal is sliding between him and the guard gap that he just left wide open. Things like that we've seen Todd Bowles do over the last few years that we've enjoyed so much. Keanu Neal can fold into that, or you can come up and you can just give them a basic look, and he can drop off into pass coverage like you would expect him to, and maybe lull the offense into a sense of false security. But I think, between Logan, between Keanu, and between the guy that I assume is your next guy to watch, the Buccaneers have a position where there's going to be a starter, but honestly, it's just going to be whatever the situation calls for on who's going to be on the field.
Yeah, and I spoke a little bit about Keanu Neal when Evan mentioned him as one of his 4 defensive players that he's really going to keep an eye on. So I'm not going to dive too much more into that. I kind of said my piece already, but I am excited to watch him. I do think that both Neal and Ryan bring things to this defense that they didn't really have before. So I'm really excited to see how they're utilized. And of course, my last player is Mike Edwards. And Edwards has been around for a while. He's made some big plays. He's been a key contributor, but now he's going to be asked to probably do a little bit more than he's done in the past, because Keanu Neal, Logan Ryan, neither one of these guys are really a one-for-one replacement for Jordan Whitehead, who Mike Edwards shared a lot of time with, because they have different strengths. They have different things that they brought to the defense. But now Edwards is probably going to see an uptick a little bit in his snaps and in his snap percentage. So is he ready to take on that role? Is Keanu Neal going to come in and take that job from him? Or is Logan Ryan going to make himself so versatile and so necessary to the defense that Edwards' snaps start to dip a little bit? We have to hurry up and wait basically to find out the answer to these things. But how is Edwards going to take on this new role as kind of that veteran safety on the back end with Antoine Winfield Jr., with these new guys coming into the system, these new guys joining the defense? I'm interested to see how he takes to that and how he performs with that kind of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, he's a guy, I think he's kind of deserved kind of the benefit of the doubt to being the number one guy there on the field in that position. But like I kind of mentioned with Keanu and kind of like we were talking about with Logan, I really do. I think it's just going to be situation dictates, you know what I mean? Depending on the offense you're facing, depending on the team that you're looking at and the look you want to give and all these things. And obviously health has something to do with it as well. But I think the best thing that Mike Edwards can do this season is show that he's a versatile part of the defense, because that's going to keep you on this team. And again, going back to the cornerbacks, when Todd Bowles is deciding like who's he going to recommend to Jason Light or who's he going to prefer to Jason Light to get an extension, the more versatile you are, I think is going to help get that equation filled. So when you got Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, you're probably getting one or the other, and then Mike Edwards if he can show that versatility.
All right, David, I know we didn't talk about discussing this on the podcast.
I hate surprises.
I know you do, but we have a little bit of time. I'm going to go ahead and ask the question and see your thoughts, because we didn't really get into specialists on this preview. No. We're going to get into that a little bit on our 53-man roster prediction, because we have to.
Right.
But is Jaelon Darden going to take that next step this year, or is he going to be fighting hard to even keep a job with this team? As their return specialist, their sixth wide receiver, whatever it is. Thoughts?
I mean, it's hard to say, because honestly, a lot of the return stuff is field vision. Like we look at guys like Devin Hester and we pray. And a lot of people, when you say like what made Devin Hester such a great return man, and people would say, oh, he was so fast, man, and he was so shifty. Okay, but the speed and the shiftiness don't help you if you can't get through the traffic, right? You look at, go drive a souped up Camaro down the highway, I-81 here in the Virginia area or in the DMV during rush hour. All of them horsepowers aren't going to do anything for you, because you can't go anywhere. You can't get through the weeds. You know what I mean? But if you've got a car and you know how to navigate through the traffic, and we've seen people who do this from time to time, it's a little less fun when it's on the highway. But you know what I mean? You can actually make some things happen. Devin Hester, an underrated, characteristic of his game was his ability to see the opponent's coverage, not only see it, but set up his guys to where they would be successful. And then when he saw the hole, hit it and accelerate through it. And that's where the speed really took over. But the speed really is the third or fourth part of that process. It's everything else that comes before it that's very important. So for Jaelon Darden, how much smarter is he coming into this season as a return specialist versus last year? How many lessons does he go through? Because it's hard to learn in the process while you're doing it. But when you go to the offseason, you talk to maybe a specialist or a coach, or you just go back and watch film, it's a little bit easier from the outside looking in to the season that was to learn some of those lessons. If he did and he applies them this year, then he's got all the physical tools. The athleticism is there. That's not the problem. The question is the field vision and understanding of blocking schemes, what the defense is trying to do, improving? If it's not, then you might see a guy like Devin Tompkins or even maybe Scotty Miller kind of take that next step, because Scotty, we know, has some athletic tools as well, but he's also a studier of the game. A studier of the game, a student of the game, I think is a better way of saying that.
Potato. Yeah, I mean, you make some great points, and man, you think back to some of the great returners that we've seen, all the way back to Deion Sanders. Obviously, that's going to be a popular name, but Devin Hester, Dante Hall, Percy Harvin, like we got to watch some incredible return. Reggie Bush was a phenomenal return guy for the New Orleans Saints, and look, I'll be honest. I think it's going to be really, really tough for Jaelon Darden to make this team if we don't see a gigantic leap forward in his game during training camp. With that, David, we are going to get out of here. Thank you again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason does not equal a break in the action. We are going to be back on Monday talking about our initial pre-training camp 53-man roster prediction, where David will get more right than I will, but that's okay. I've come to terms with the fact that he always wins this game against me, so it is what it is. It'll be interesting to see how each of our rosters play out. If you have any thoughts, questions, ideas, comments, feel free to email us at lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com or give us a voicemail over at 813-444-5841. Check out David's written work over at bucksgameday.com. Check out mine over at bucksnation.com, and follow along on Twitter at LockedOnBucks, at Yarcho_Bucks, and at DHarrison82. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. We thank you so much for joining us right here at Locked On Bucs.